Program are pre-recorded Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bakken along with Brad Feldman from the Bismarck Bobcats. And Brad, Aberdeen last week split, which anytime you split on the road, it's usually a good thing. But what I really noticed from the game was probably some depth issues. And that all comes back for you guys just aren't that healthy right now.
Yeah, we're kind of dealing with an injury bug, a couple concussions here and there, whatever injuries the guys are dealing with, right? But, it's a long season. We're, a couple months into this thing. Bumps and bruises, man. It's a physical game, so you're going to have to deal with that. The best teams rise to the top, and the best teams are the ones that are able to overcome that and continue to win.
So at this point in the season and, going back, you're pretty hard pressed to find a Bobcats team that, at least on the win-loss column, looks as good as this team does. It's hard to find that. It's just all the good teams that the Bobcats have ever had. It's like, hey, the record speaks, right? And there's always that old adage. It's like, doesn't matter. A win's a win. Doesn't matter if it's pretty, ugly, or however you're doing it. And most of them have been pretty pretty. But when you start getting injuries, it's like, okay, it's grinding time. And it's just get the win and then let's get healthy. And what are some of the timelines on some of the players coming back?
I'm not even sure on the timelines of some of them. I know I did hear in the office today some of them are going to be coming back this weekend, so that's a good sign. But I think here's the biggest thing. I think the fact that the boys have continued to win. We only have 2 regulation losses on the year. We have 1 shootout loss on the year. I think it just goes to show the depth that this year's Bobcat team has, like you had mentioned. The hockey ops side between Garrett, Lane, Nico, Wade Chido. They've done an absolute fantastic job getting the right players in here that fit the model and what we want to do here, and just continue to win and put wins in the win column.
You mentioned the depth side of that, and, part of having some injuries is, you want to have a little depth, but this is, from the beginning, has been a really deep team this year. You don't want to go too deep in with injuries and players being out, but the depth has really served itself well. But that's also something that's going to serve itself later in the season when you start grinding into those dog days of a long winter. And, you get players that get a little seasoned early in the year. That's got to be helpful.
Oh, absolutely. I talked to some of the staff that we have here, game ops staff that we've been around for quite a while now. We talk all the time, when this guy gets back off of being injured or this guy gets back off of being injured, who exactly are you going to sit? Which guy on this team should be taken out of the lineup on a daily basis because this guy's now healthy? That's a tough decision. I'm glad Garrett's the one that has to deal with that because I would struggle with that one. But, you look all the way, line 1, 2, 3, 4, you have high-quality players at every position that can make an impact on any given night.
Well, that's the other side to a healthy scratch. A lot of guys will go, okay, well, you're looking on the outside looking in going, okay, why is a player a healthy scratch? And they start questioning the player, especially when you're at the upper echelon, right, looking down on when you're doing recruiting. And the Bobcats are in a position where it's like, we're going to have some healthy scratches, and it's not because of anything that player's doing. It's just we're that deep. And that has got to be a hard decision for one, but kind of a good position to be in for Garrett and the rest of the staff.
Yeah, that's the thing is if you're a healthy scratch, you're looking at this lineup and you're watching them play on a Friday, Saturday night, week after week going, okay, well, what do I have to do to try to crack this lineup? And that's a tough question to answer for a lot of these guys that haven't been playing. How do you crack a lineup that only has 3 losses on the year?
It's a good luxury to have.
Deal to try to get an answer to.
it's not a problem. It's a luxury at that point. But it also
absolutely
makes a lot of players work a little bit harder, too, because you're right. You got to crack that lineup. All right, coming into this weekend, again, the Bobcats are on the road. And, of course, you can follow all the Bobcats games right here on your home of the Bobcats, Super Talk 1270. What are we known about Watertown Shamrocks?
You know, Watertown being a new team, we knew that they would have some struggles, obviously, just getting acclimated to the NAHL and the level of play. You know, we've beat them every single time we've played them this year. So it's going to be a fun time. It's our last trip down to Watertown because we only have to go there twice. Brand new arena. Everything I hear is it's amazing. So luckily I'll be down. I'll be like 30 miles away from there for a kids hockey tournament. So I'm going to try to make the trip up and check it out.
Yeah, I heard the facilities down there are pretty nice, so you'll have to give us an update on that later. But what have some of the matchups looked like? Because you mentioned they're a new team, so they're young, they're getting acclimated. The Bobcats have handled them in previous meetings. What's the strategy or the thought process going into to this weekend's game? Because, you know, anytime you're playing a team on the road, you know, they've got that home ice advantage, and you know, I don't think there's any team that lacks for fan support around the NAHL. So you got to be a little leery going into somebody else's barn.
Yeah, you always have to because, you know, their fans, from what I hear, their fans are pretty excited. You know, they have a team, you know, they're trying to get behind them and they're building a nice fan base down there. You know, I hear Garrett talk all the time, you know, just, you know, pressure the puck, you know, play our game, stay within our system, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's all the coaches 101 stuff, right? But the biggest thing is, you know, just go down, play your game. And, you know, it's been successful so far. We've beat them, 6 times, I believe. So, well, no, we've beat them 4 times. Sorry. So you beat them 4 times. So go back down there. You have a recipe for success. Just go repeat that.
Well, looking forward to a great weekend for the Bobcats on the road, taking on the Watertown Shamrocks, new team in the NAHL. And, you know, they're another one of those teams that in proximity is close enough to really could spark a pretty good rivalry, kind of like Aberdeen and Minot have done. You know, we travel well. We bring players. We bring fans. You know, when we talk about the Bobcat team going on the road, those closer games like that, it's an opportunity for the Bobcat family to go on the road, and the Bobcats really travel well.
Yeah, we do. You know, the fans are so excited. I know there were some down in Minnesota, down by the cities at Forest Lake. I know they were down there a couple weekends ago. So, yeah, I expect to see some Bobcat fans down there this weekend if I'm there. You know, there's a Bismarck youth hockey team not far from there, so maybe that'd be a fun time to go to a game.
Oh, yeah, it'll be a good time. So best of luck on the road. Of course, you can catch all the games right here on your home of the Bobcats, Super Talk 1270. Brad, best of luck this weekend with both your kids' tournament and the Bobcats down in Watertown.
Yep, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brad Feldman with the Bismarck Bobcats. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 20. Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, your tune to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bakken. Joining us in the studio, Rebecca Binstock with the Ethics Commission, and a lot of talk about ethics with what's coming up with the next session. And it's always a conversation because really the Ethics Commission is something newer in North Dakota. And Rebecca, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of a background for the Ethics Commission? And then I want to get into why it's important, that educational piece now, because it's about education. I mean, people don't know if they're doing something ethically wrong with the way the statutes, as you've got new legislatures coming in. And we do have a lot of turnover now with term limits. So it's about an educational process. And I want to get into that, but a little background on the Ethics Commission.
Perfect. Well, good morning, Steve. Thanks for having me. So let's talk about the Ethics Commission in general. So the North Dakota Ethics Commission was formed from an initiated measure, right? We had an initiated measure back in 2018. It was on the ballot. The voters passed it. They approved it. It became effective in 2019. Then in 2019, we had 5 commissioners that were appointed. So the individuals who serve on the Ethics Commission are appointed by a consensus agreement, a little bit unique, not majority, consensus agreement of the governor, Senate Majority Leader, and Senate Minority Leader. So we have 5 commissioners that are appointed in 2019, and then they get to start doing their work, right?
So a little background, when the initiated measure fired up, I mean, because it's kind of something you take for granted a little bit. It's like, well, why do we need an ethics commission? Because it's North Dakota. Shouldn't we be ethical to begin with?
We should be ethical to begin with. Yes, absolutely.
But it was, some of it was some of the lobbying pieces, and people were having concerns that, is the legislator, because you got to remember this is back before term limits, and was it a club, or are we getting the best value? Were people doing things that they just don't know about, and that's where the education piece comes in. But you got to have an ethics commission to be able to do that education.
Right. So I think back, if you look before the initiated measure, there was a lot of we don't know. Right?
Yeah.
We don't have,
gray area.
we don't have, and we didn't have information, right? We didn't have a way to disclose stuff. There wasn't a way to process certain complaints or certain issues, right? So there was a lot of, I think, unknown. And then whenever you have unknown, it creates uncertainty and questions, and then you start asking a lot of questions, right? And then you did have things that were popping up in the media, that were problems. And so then you can people would take those and then run with it, let's say, right? So with the Ethics Commission coming into place, let's fast forward. So what did the voters put it into place? What does it actually do, right?
It's about setting up standards and rules so people, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, if you're in politics, if you don't know the rules of the game, then there's an opportunity to blur some lines, whether intentional or not.
Whether intentional or not.
And that is the education piece of the Ethics Commission, because it's here. There's no gray area. You know where the line is, and you don't cross it.
Yep. So that is really what the Ethics Commission is all about, right? Is providing that education. So we do have an investigative arm, right, where we can investigate things that come into our office. But primarily what we want to focus on is preventing issues and making sure that people have the information ahead of time so that they can make more ethical, better decisions, right?
Make sure they're educated so that it's, am I getting a cup of coffee from somebody I shouldn't be getting a cup of coffee?
Right. Or something else. Am I voting on something that I should be voting on? Is it okay that I take this action, right? And so, before we had the Ethics Commission, and even before recently, the educational component, there was not a lot of education for state public officials, legislators. So as the Ethics Commission really came into its own, we want to talk about and provide educational resources. So that can be done, and we do it through a variety of ways. So the very first thing that we have is we do webinars. We talk about, we have educational sessions that are an hour-long discussion on a topic, okay? So that is one of the first things that we put out. You can listen to those on our website. Those are available to everybody. So the other thing that we've done is we've made information hopefully accessible, meaning that you can access it if you need it.
Well, there's kind of 3 components to this. So, and we're talking about the legislature coming into session now.
Yes, legislature's coming into session.
The legislators being able to go, okay, I have a question, and being able to go and look at those guidelines. But the media as well to know, if you're going to go chase a story down, was something ethical? Is there a violation there or not?
Yep.
And then the public, because it's about the constituents, and having that knowledge as a voter and a constituent and a taxpayer and resident of North Dakota is very valuable too, because I'm a big proponent. People should be doing their homework, and there's some accountability, and you should know what is right and wrong, especially today with social media, because good Lord, something can get off the rails in a hurry, because it's rumor and conjecture and it's not factual and stuff can go in different directions because of social media today. So having the ability to know all the information, and as the Ethics Commission has really turned into an educational resource, I like the direction you guys are going.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of trepidation the Ethics Commission first was created.
Yeah, they were concerned, a lot of individuals were concerned that it would be this gotcha kind of entity, that it could be politically weaponized, that sort of thing.
Correct.
And that's still, we have to address some of those concerns and some of those issues on the investigation side. But it really comes down to providing information to the stakeholders, like you talked about, the public, the media, public officials, right? And how we do that really comes down to what, especially as we are moving into legislative session, right? That we are pushing forward with that. So also keep in mind that as we are doing education, so just to kind of give you an idea, so far this fall, right? We are currently in the organizational session, right? Organizational session is here right now. And so we've been doing education specifically with legislators. So that's been our focus for the last few days. Let's give them the information that they need to know, best practices, and let's not do it in a big auditorium, bring them all in. We want to have one-on-one conversations. We want to have small groups. So we've been doing that. We also provide a lot of information to them ahead of time so that they know. And also that quick guidance, right? Informal guidance, like, hey, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this?
Where's my crib notes?
Yeah, where's my notes? What do I need to do? So we've tried to create kind of workable things because they're not legislators, 100% of the time, right? Or they're new. So we try to provide them with those resources.
And as a quote unquote citizen legislature, which I'll debate at times, but you do have people working in the private sector and doing other things, and there is an opportunity, whether intentional or not, for the private side to bleed into the legislative side, and they need to know that.
Yes, yeah. And I think that a lot of individuals who serve in the legislature that have that are aware of that, and that's one of the things that we're talking about.
We're talking with Rebecca Minstock with the North Dakota Ethics Commission. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, Super Talk 1270. Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bachel. I'm with Rebecca Binstock with the North Dakota Ethics Commission. We're talking about ethics, new session coming in, a lot of new legislators coming in after the first of the year with the session, and a lot to know, a lot to learn for them, for the media, for the public when it comes to ethics. One of the questions I've been asked fairly recently is if somebody were to have an ethics question or think there's a violation, what's the process of who do I report this to? Who do I talk to? Do you just call up the North Dakota Ethics Commission and go, hey, I have a concern. Does this fit the criteria? Is it as simple as that, or what's the process?
Yeah, great question, Steve. You know what? It is as simple as that. So the Ethics Commission can take a complaint in from a North Dakota resident in really any form. It can be a phone call. There is a hotline that people can submit tips through. That number is available on our website. There's also a form, an online form that somebody can submit through our website as well. We've made that pretty user-friendly so that you can attach documents if you need to, submit information. Or if you're not sure, you can just call and ask us. So we have staff available. The Ethics Commission doesn't have jurisdiction or authority over local officials. That's probably one of the questions we get the most frequently.
Yeah, where's the bottom end? Where's the line?
Who do you guys investigate? Alleged violations against? And so we
it's
don't.
The state level.
And it's state level. So it is state level. So
okay,
we
but
do have
casting
that.
the net statewide, then that could go into higher education. That could go into legislators. That could be Commerce Department, any state agency, that's under your jurisdiction.
So there's some exceptions. So it's going to be, the definition or the word is public officials, anybody who's a public official. So this is going to be anybody who's elected, right? This is going to be our legislators, our statewide elected individuals, anybody in the executive branch who's appointed. So that's going to include cabinet members and then individuals who serve in the executive branch who are appointed, right? So there's certain individuals such as myself. I'm not in the executive branch. We're in this independent ethics commission, but I'm appointed to serve in my role, right? So it also is going to include individuals who serve on the ethics commission. They included themselves within that. They have to follow the rules. And then it's going to include legislative employees. So there are general executive branch employees who are serving in the state. They are going to be excluded. So it is limited to the number of people or the individuals. So, but let's say that somebody does have a complaint or a question. They're not quite sure. They can come to us. They can talk to us about it. If they do want to move ahead and file a complaint with the commission, it really is, it's a 3-step process. And it requires us to initially review something once it comes in and say, hey, can we even be looking at this? Is this
step
something?
One is you're required to, if somebody has a question, you're required to assess that. Yep. And I can imagine a lot of cases because of lack of education.
Yep.
People go, hey, I think there's something here, a violation. And when you go through it, it's like, that doesn't meet the criteria.
Right. We do a lot of that.
Right. And so, again, up front, diffusing what could have been something that was blown out of proportion and not accurate, because it's about being accurate and having the right information. So
it is, yes. Yeah. So we can do that right away. We can handle things that aren't within our jurisdiction. We can get rid of them pretty quickly. Then we are left with moving toward, so we review it. We say, yep, this is something that the Ethics Commission can look into. No, it's not. If it isn't something the Ethics Commission can look into, there might be another local entity or a county commission, city commission that something should go to. And we do, let people know who come to us.
So getting things to the right place is very important,
Part of it is getting things to the right place. Now, we can't provide them legal advice, but we can certainly say, hey, maybe talk to this person. Let's go there. The second step is trying to informally resolve anything that happens. So we're required under the statute to try to informally resolve. What we have learned over the course of the last 4 years in dealing with this is that is not the easiest process, because you have a complainant who is concerned and may see something that they don't like, and it's hard to get that done. We have been successful on a few occasions, but then at that point, if we can't resolve something, then we move into more of an investigation stage, right? Where we are fact gathering, where we are interviewing people, we're taking depositions, we're moving towards that, so then we can create a report. Now, I will tell you that the commission is actually looking to change this process just a little bit to get away from some of the negative connotation, because there is an education component even in that process, that somebody could have done something that they didn't even realize they shouldn't have done really early on, and they would have been able to correct it and say, hey, if I would have known that, I wouldn't have done it. So we're trying to actually...
Kind of a remediation process.
Yes, absolutely. We're trying to build in that education into this process. So expect some changes in the coming session for how that process looks in an effort to almost streamline it.
So when you're looking at a complaint coming in, it's first of all, is it a complaint? Mm-hmm. Second of all, is it going in the right place that it needs to go to?
Yep.
And then the third part is, okay, there's something here and there's an investigation that takes place now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's correct.
So what does an investigation look like?
Yep. So an investigation is going to look very similar to a civil case, right? Where we gather documents from places, whether it is private citizens, whether it is other state agencies. We're going to be conducting interviews with people. We're going to be requesting records. Those sorts of things, asking questions of people so that we can then get a full picture of what happened. Sometimes that can be pretty short, right? Something happened, very direct, involves few people. Sometimes that's bigger. And so then at the end, as executive director, I produce a report that the commission and the individual who we are, investigating, I don't want to use that kind of negative connotation, but that is in this process, that they are both provided. And so then from there, the commission decides if that is an ethical violation or if it is not an ethical violation.
And, okay, we know what happens if it's not. What happens if it is?
What happens if it is? So there are certain circumstances where there's fines or penalties that are associated with those, and that's laid out. Some of the other things is if there is an ethical violation, the fact that there is an ethical violation, is in fact the consequence, right? That there is now a public finding out there that something shouldn't have happened, right?
And an ethical violation can reach different levels as well, because it's like, did somebody take a cup of coffee from somebody they shouldn't have, or is it more intensive than that? So I can imagine there's a great big spectrum.
There is. Yeah. So there is a spectrum. And then the other thing is that the commission can actually refer its findings to another state entity once it's done. So if it needs to hand it over to, the Secretary of State to do some auditing, or to a county commission, or, I can't imagine a time when that would come up, but another state entity.
Yeah, it really could.
It could.
Rebecca Binstock, Executive Director of North Dakota Ethics Commission. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk. Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bach, along with Rebecca Binstock, Executive Director in North Dakota Ethics Commission. And we're talking about education with the session coming in. There's a couple different components of that, having the legislators and state elected office holders being educated on the ethics rules, because whether intended or not, it's important that they know what the guidelines for having good ethics in the legislature or your office are. But there's some other components to that too. It's the media, it's the public, the constituents, knowing what an ethics violation is, because in today's day and age, not being educated on something, you run the risk of, something splattered all over social media, so it must be true, right? That's how that works, right? If something's on social media, it's got to be fact, right? But that's one of the things that the Ethics Commission protects against, and it all comes back to education.
It all comes back to education. So when we talk about the mission of the Ethics Commission, it is to increase transparency. Right? It all comes down to increasing transparency. So we are providing more data, more disclosures, having meeting notices filed, those sorts of things. But then, so we provide an avenue for that, but it also requires participation from the voters, from the public citizens, to be able to go and say, yep, I'm going to use that information that they're providing. So I always like to say that ethics commissions alone don't create an ethical government. It is the relationship between ethics commissions, their public officials, and the citizens, and the media. The media plays a portion in that too.
Very large role.
That they all have to come together. And so as we talk about education, it is just as important for us to educate the public, the North Dakota citizen, about what your role is, what our mission is, what we are here to help with, and what your role is, what you can do, what you should look out for, what aren't concerns, what are concerns, the do's and the don'ts, right? Because they play that crucial, if you talk about a stool, right, it's the third leg that you gotta have that interaction. And so we reach out to, and we want to make sure that we provide education to the public as well as to our elected officials. So we're doing that next week.
You got an event coming up. So we
got an event coming up. So on December 9th, we are at the Heritage Center at 6 p.m. And we have an event that is open to all North Dakota residents. There's no registration. It's free. And really, we are going to talk about the basics. We're going to talk about ethics basics, ethics commission basics. What are the rules? What are the do's? What are the don'ts as we go into legislative session? If you are involved in the legislature, meaning that you're an observer, you're testifying, you are providing support, you're working with a nonprofit, what do you need to know going in?
Or like in a lot of cases, municipalities are going there to deal with, which aren't really under your purvey, but they're having interaction with elected officials. So it's important that they know the rules as well. I can imagine lobbyists should probably know.
Yep. Yes.
So you work independently with incoming legislators and the legislators that are coming in. Do you work with the lobbyists too, going, hey, here's all the rules?
Yep. So we actually break our education out into stakeholders. who is the stakeholder that we're trying to reach at that time. So we've already met with the lobbyists. We had an event for them. We have a follow-up event coming up for them in early January. This week we've been focusing on legislators. In a few weeks, we're going to be focusing on those new cabinet members that are coming in, right? We're going to have new cabinet members coming in. We're going to have new elected officials coming in that are not members of the legislature. And then our fourth stakeholder group is the public, right? So we have those kind of education that has been tailored specifically to those particular groups of people.
And I can imagine it's very important that the media knows all this as well. Mm-hmm. So does the media qualify as the stakeholder group with the public?
With the public. We usually include them with the public. Okay. Yeah, we usually do. But you are right, because information can even get lost in media.
Well,
right?
And a lot of times, if somebody thinks there's something going on, they'll call a media individual.
Will call media.
I get phone calls all the time. It's like for a lot of people, that's their first point of contact.
Mm-hmm. It can be, yeah. So informing the media about what is and what isn't a violation, or what do you need to watch out for, when to come ask questions, those sorts of things, that is included with that public kind of information. But yeah, media plays a really big role.
Well, and as being part of the media sometimes, what's more important is knowing the right questions to ask. So if you're educated, you're going to know the right questions to ask.
You are going to know the right questions to ask.
That's the important part a lot of times when it comes to ethics.
It is.
So this event coming up at the Heritage Center, 6 p.m. on Monday, 12/9/24, public education session for the public, for the media, for anybody who is interested. This is an open forum. Come and learn about ethics in North Dakota and what the Ethics Commission does and what the process is and what a violation is. What else are people going to find out at this meeting?
So really, we're gonna talk about what role you play as a citizen, right? That we can't be successful in having an ethical and transparent government without you, and you play a crucial role. And by you, I mean all citizens of North Dakota.
If you live in North Dakota, you play a role.
You do. Yes, absolutely.
So as far as the evening, kind of block off, 2-3 hours?
Oh, gosh, no. We're going to have you in and out of there.
5 hours?
Yeah. No. I'd like to eat dinner at some point. So it's from 6 to 7. That is when we have our kind of programmed time. And then we also have a little time for question and answer. If you have questions, we'll be there, have general information available afterwards.
So no cost to sign up?
No cost to sign up. It's open to the public.
If people want to reach out or find out more information, your website,
yes.
Where do people go?
So people can go to ethicscommission.nd.gov. The website that we have is full of information. So we have information on all of our upcoming educational sessions, all of our educational resources, all of our charts are there. If you have a question, you can submit a question online. You can submit basically any communication that goes through the website comes to us, and then all of our phone numbers, including the complaint hotline, is all listed on the website.
So once again, the website?
ethicscommission.nd.gov.
And public education session up at the Heritage Center Monday night, 6 p.m., 12/9/24.
Yeah.
Block off an hour, hour and a half.
Block off an hour and come be ethical.
Yeah, and learn. I mean, it's all about the education piece. Rebecca, thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Steve.
A lot going on with the Ethics Commission, a lot of things that people should know, whether you're an elected official, whether you're a representative, whether you're working in government, whether you're a voter. It doesn't matter. You should probably know all this information. If you're in the media, invite people in the media to show up to this as well. But it's going to be a great event at the Heritage Center to learn all about what the Ethics Commission does and really about that scope of ethics in North Dakota as we're heading into a new session. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Talk of the Town, weekday mornings starting at 9 on Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app. Bismarck and Mandan, Super Talk 1270.
Portions of the following program are pre-recorded.
Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bakken, and joining us in the studio, Dietrich from Bismarck Transit, also Mike Connolly, City Commissioner for the City of Bismarck. Mike, we're going to talk a little bit about something that's going to be on the ballot coming up here. Well, actually, ballots are starting to be out a little sooner than later. And Deidre, thanks for coming in again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So a little rundown where we're at with transit, because it's kind of it's always a question of what's going on with Bismarck Transit. People look at the buses, they don't see high ridership. There's a need in the community. The funding, I don't think people always understand how the operational costs are divvied out. There's federal dollars involved. So we're going to take a little pause, back up a little bit, and kind of an overview. How does Bismarck Transit work for the consumers in the community?
So right now, we've actually had a extreme jump in ridership, especially for our capital area transit, the CAT bus, the public bus, the larger ones that you see around town. So in August, we had over 11,500 trips. So that's the highest that we've had since 2017, 2016.
Been a long time. Yeah.
Been a very long time. So I know one common misconception is people see the buses and they see that no one's in them. You're seeing a snapshot in time, whether you're passing you on the road or, they're pulled over letting someone off or someone's boarding. You see that one little drop in time. But when you're looking at the picture of 12 hours a day, every single day minus Sundays, we're actually performing better than we had been in almost a decade. On the flip side, our paratransit service, we're at about 7,500, 8,000 trips per month. So that's a good number for us to be at. But one thing that's been a pain point for us since really the pandemic was staffing with our drivers. If we don't have staffing for our bus drivers, the consumer is impacted because now we're having longer wait times. We're having to deny trips because we just don't have the capacity. We're now at a position where we've actually jumped up the number of drivers that we've had, which unfortunately does cost me more money. But that means that we're able to really make sure that each one of the riders who's calling in to schedule a ride, whether that's 2 weeks in advance, which they can schedule up to 2 weeks in advance, or the day before, we're able to actually perform that trip now.
Well, and that was a thing that, I'm going to put on my former mayor hat for a minute, and that was a conversation that we had quite often at the table was, where the quality of life for paratransit riders fit into that equation. Because for me, that's the job. Everything else is beyond that. But I don't think people always understand that they have to work together, because without one, you really don't have the service with the other. So it's kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first had transit here back in the early 90s, we never had the fixed route service. It was only a service for the elderly and disabled. So that really set the tone for what public transportation was in our community. We had a lot of individuals who maybe were using the system more as a taxi service than really a shared ride system. Fast forward to 2017 when we did a major revamp of the system and ended up having to do some service cuts just for budgetary reasons. That shifted a little bit, where we were maybe a little bit stricter on how people were qualified for riding the bus. Obviously, that took a little bit of time for everyone to get used to. But realistically, the whole goal of that was to balance out the service for the general public as well as the service for the elderly and disabled. Our funding is directly tied, like you mentioned, directly tied to both services. We don't have the ability to have one without the other. So eliminating the fixed route service, in theory, if we have budgetary issues, sounds like a great idea, but we lose our major federal grant if we would do that, and that's over $2 million a year. So eliminating that fixed route service is really out of the question, when we're talking budgetary things like that. And then when you look at doing service changes for the paratransit, now we're not actually performing the service that the community needs if we're talking major service reductions just to align with the hours of what our fixed route service is.
So again, it's kind of a juggling act. You don't want to provide too much service in one area so that you can, because that affects providing the service on the other side, which is the paratransit side, which that is a quality of life issue. And Commissioner Conley, with this being part of your portfolio and you being in the healthcare world, you see this firsthand on the impacts that paratransit ridership has to deal with.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a traveler in the medical field, and one of the things going from facility to facility is that facilities will oftentimes have a bus in order to get their grandmas and grandpas to medical treatment or mental health treatment appointments. But if grandma or grandpa wants to stay connected to the family through like weddings or graduations or funerals, if the family cannot provide the ride, then those folks end up isolated and disconnected. And that's where a public transportation system comes into place, is they can accommodate those rides. As well as there's a significant amount of people, our grandmas and grandpas, that remain independent in their homes because they have access. They've gone beyond the point to where they can drive. We don't want them driving. And that keeps their retirements and their dollars in the community locally, where if they go into a nursing care facility, a lot of that money gets paid to D.C. and we see it a couple of years later. So there's a direct benefit. If
they even have the ability to remain local. I have talked to more people, and you probably have a little bit more insight on this. I've talked to more people in the healthcare where they're having difficulties finding facilities to take in their parents, grandparents, and people with maybe a little bit of a different type of care. The facilities just aren't out there because they have a crisis in workers as well.
Absolutely, and that's where some of the push is going towards more home health care options through our alternative dwelling units, our alternative dwelling spaces. So we can create these things to keep our families connected, but it's a matter of creating the conversation, making sure the dollars are there so we can move forward in the right way as a community.
And there's so many things that come back to transportation. It is such a huge component of a lot of different facets. We're going to get into that a little bit more. We're talking with Deidre from Bismarck Transit, Mike Conley, Bismarck City Commissioner. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Talk of the Town, brought to you by Big Boy. Just get in line. It moves fast. Trademark Realty and Silver Ranch. Talk of the Town.
Are you ever questioning
Super Talk 12? Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bach, along with Deidre from Bismarck Transit, Mike Conley, Bismarck City Commissioner. We're talking about transportation needs right now. I want to shift a little bit because we mentioned in transportation, connectivity, whether it's on the paratransit side, for just continuing a quality of life, having the same opportunities that those without disability have, or the working perspective with public transit. And I kind of want to separate those two a little bit and talk to you, Deidre, about why it's important for a community to have a public transit system, and knowing that without one you really struggle with the other. But let's start with the public transit side. Why is that important for the Bismarck community?
Absolutely. So when we're talking public transit, we're talking the city bus, the larger Cat bus, capital area transit.
Okay, question everybody asked, because I asked this too when I was married. Why can't we have smaller buses to meet the ridership that we see on the buses?
Yeah, absolutely. So this comes up quite a bit. You're not the only person who have asked me this question. So the way that the federal grants are fashioned, we have actually 85% of every capital purchase for our rolling stock is covered by a federal grant. So we're only covering 15% of that. However, the FTA, which is the Federal Transit Administration, has guidelines and restrictions on the useful life of each one of our vehicles. So our smaller vehicles, the paratransit buses, the white buses you see driving around, that's about 5 to 7 years. Whereas our larger vehicles, the useful life can be up to 12, 14 years. So when you're looking at your initial investment, we're paying about $470,000 for those larger buses. But again, keep in mind, I'm only paying 15% of that. So about $70,000 for one of those larger buses. I have that one-time investment, and then I have that bus for 12, 14 years. Whereas those smaller buses, I'm paying about $160,000, and I'm buying that bus 2-3 times over than what I would a larger bus. Again, those larger buses are also built for the stop flag down system. So, they have the ramp where individuals are able to, board and disembark without having the driver, get out of their seat and let down the lift like you would need to with our paratransit vehicles. So that keeps the bus running on schedule. Those vehicles are really specifically built for a public transit flag down system. When you talk about our paratransit, those buses are not built for stop and go traffic. They are not built to, have people boarding, every 5-10 minutes, when we're pulling over to the side of the road. They're also not built to have the number of miles put on them. Useful life of those buses is about 150,000, 200,000 miles, whereas I've had a bus, a capital area transit bus that we have had, I think it was over 600,000 miles on it before we finally decommissioned it. It had celebrated its 18th birthday, So the initial investment and the long-term use really is a major component that we consider when we're purchasing vehicles of that size. And not to mention, you think someone's bringing a cart of groceries or a stroller or things of that nature. They stop at Walmart. It's a lot more challenging to have maybe a couple of those individuals on a paratransit vehicle than if you have the larger city bus where you have a lot more space for people to spread out. And then during our peak times, we are seeing, 10 to 15 people on that bus, and the capacity is much different.
The other question comes up, and a lot of the reason they're tied together is because people think of, well, this big bus, it's got to have more fuel costs and more. Explain that for our listeners this morning.
Yeah, so that's an analysis that we've done multiple times, and we actually have to do that for our grants. So it's fact-checked by several government agencies. We're looking at about the exact same miles per gallon or fuel usage on our fixed route buses as well as our paratransit. So it's about 7 miles per gallon. Only difference is the larger buses are diesel, the smaller buses are gasoline. But it's pretty much the exact same fuel consumption, which is surprising, I know. But unfortunately, we're about in that 7 miles per gallon range.
Okay, so coming back, why is it important to have a public transit system for a growing community like Bismarck and Mandan and Lincoln?
Yeah, absolutely. So one component that I think a lot of people don't really consider is when we're talking economic growth in the area and possibly having companies come into the area, one thing that they look at, is there a public transit system that they can use to promote workers throughout the area? So think of like a Bobcat or a larger company. If they're looking for a new headquarters or a new place to develop, they're not going to consider a location or
Cloverdale's a great example.
Cloverdale's a wonderful example.
University of Mary is another great example because a lot of those students may not have vehicles.
Yep.
It's kind of a weird little nuance, but when I was mayor, we had that conversation about, okay, how do we keep that route going?
Yeah, absolutely. And we work very closely with both Cloverdale and the University of Mary to do travel trainings. We go out on site. We have them come to the facility. We get them on the bus. So if they're a little apprehensive about using public transit for the first time, we kind of hold their hands until they feel a little bit more comfortable. But that's one component of it is people or these organizations will not consider communities that don't have access to appropriate public transportation. And I mean, we might be in a little bit of the gray area because our public transportation is not the most comprehensive. Ending at 7 o'clock for budgetary reasons obviously is not ideal. We're missing a lot of those second shift, third shift workers, but at least we're able to fill a gap for a portion of what's needed for the transportation. We're getting them to work, or we're getting them from work, or, maybe the recreational side of things. We're getting them to groceries and all their other errands and things like that. So that's one of the main reasons.
So you touched a little bit on the shift work side of stuff, but peak times. Mm-hmm. So what are the peak times when you're looking at public transit?
So our peak times would be from about 7 to 9, and then 3
AM.
to AM, yes, and then about 3 to 5:30, 6 p.m.
So what does the system look like in? Well, I'm not going to call it downtime, but a little bit more slack time.
So we run the exact same routes throughout the entire day. We might just have a lower ridership during that downtime, not to the point where we'd want to suspend it at any point. But if we're talking like 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock, we might not see 10, 15 people on the bus. You might only see 2 or 3 who are, retired and they're going to CVS to get their prescriptions or something like that. Whereas during those more peak times, we're potentially taking children to school. We're taking people to their places of employment or medical, anything like that.
Well, I think one of the misconceptions too, and I might be guilty of this sometimes as well, because it would drive me nuts seeing it's like, wow, look at those buses and nobody's in them. But when are you looking too? It's like I'm busy when I'm going to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm not paying attention to the buses. Or if I'm running an errand at work and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's not going to be that ridership. So, perception for a lot of people winds up being reality. We're going to switch over to the paratransit side when we come back from the break. We're talking with Deidre from Bismarck and Transit, Mike Conley, City Commissioner. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
To Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Blackman along with Deidre from Bismarck and Transit and Mike Conley, Bismarck City Commissioner. We're talking about transportation needs within a community, a growing community like the Bismarck, Mandan, Lincoln, Burley, Morton County side of things. Of course, transit works just within the community, within city limits of our communities. But why is it important to have those transportation options within a community? And I want to shift gears now to the paratransit side, because this is something where I've got a little bit more passion. And Deidre, you know me, it's about making sure that's our responsibility. Mm-hmm. For me, that's the responsibility, is making sure that the quality of life and the opportunities for paratransit riders are there. And when I was mayor, that was where I looked at the fiscal responsibility for the community, and it's just, that's our job. So talk a little bit about those transportation needs, because we have a very robust paratransit ridership. There's some gaps, there's some holes, there's more needs. Hours are always a concern, holidays are always a concern, but being able to utilize that community within our community from a job experience and across the board, it is vital that we have a robust paratransit system. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about some of those transportation needs, gaps, and where things are at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I do want to touch on is if you're looking at our paratransit service, the hours that we do offer it, I would challenge you to take a moment to compare our system to any other system in the Midwest or even, the upper Midwest. We have one of the most comprehensive, one of the longest running paratransit systems of any other service provider. So we're starting at 5:30 a.m. We're running until midnight, Monday through Saturday. Sunday, we do have shortened hours, 7:30 to 2:30, but the need is there for those hours of service. We have a very, like you said, a very strong community of the elderly and disabled who need this service. Unfortunately, this is the service that does cost us more money to provide. And that's where we really get into that major pain point of how are we finding the balance? We know that the need is there. Obviously, we know that that's there. But how are we able to close the gap on funding so we're not having these conversations year after year of, okay, we might be looking at reducing from running to midnight to now we might only have to be able to run till 9. And that's a major concern for the consumer, because their whole lives revolve around being able to still be members of the community.
Connectivity.
Exactly. And if we're having this carrot every year and pulling it away from them saying, hey, we just can't figure out the funding situation, it might not be service that is as comprehensive as you're used to in 2 years. That just puts extra stress on these individuals' lives that really doesn't need to be there. And that's obviously one of the reasons why Commissioner Conley and myself have been, working on some new funding components.
And if I can interject into that, we have a significant number of people that, because of their abilities, they're filling in the gaps for businesses that
huge workforce component.
Having trouble finding employees. These are dedicated employees. They're actually producing in the community. Well, based on abilities and challenges, they're like superhumans. They have superpowers in respect that they're overcoming a lot, but they can actually provide. If they're isolated at home, we're still paying because if we take their access away, they can't produce. But through dignity, they deserve a place in our community. And I would rather have them connected and helping our community thrive than being isolated or facing institutionalization, just because it changes the dynamic of how our community functions.
So that balancing act, and because it comes up all the time, how do we supply the resources needed for the paratransit side? And I don't think there's anybody at the commission table that or within the community that doesn't agree that there is a greater need there. And you compared how robust our system is to a lot of the other communities. And yes, that's a nice comp, but we can always do a little bit better. So if we're setting the standard, let the other communities come to us and go, how are you doing this? So when you're always trying to reinvent the system, which you are because every year the funding winds up being a little bit different, how difficult is that having to go, okay, I got to put that creative hat on every single year?
Yeah, it's definitely an administrative challenge. It's challenging for our board. Like I said, we beat the dead horse. We've had the conversation over and over again. And there's only so many ways that you can cut the pie. The money's staying the same or, even being reduced in some cases. And the service has to stay the same or, like you said, improve at some point. Obviously, we'd love to talk improvements. It's just so hard to edge into those conversations when we're barely keeping our head above water right now. And obviously, it's not for being fiscally irresponsible. I mean, we have a board that is very, very involved. I've been with transit for 6 years now, and I've seen the ebbs and flows of funding and the direction of the community and things like that. But the biggest issue is the cost is rising for everything, and the funding is staying the same. So no matter what we do creatively to try and fix that issue, we just can't rub two pennies together and make more money. It doesn't work. So transit is funded partially by the federal government. We have some standard grants that we don't have to apply for. We also do have some competitive grants that we apply for each year to help with our operating expenses and obviously our capital purchases like our buses. Then we also do have 3 mills through the city of Bismarck and 2 mills through the city of Mandan. So that property tax component pays for a portion of the service as well. A small amount comes from the state of North Dakota. So it's about $470,000 a year that we get from the state of North Dakota. And then that's it. So a lot of people think, well, increase fares, fix fares, or add more to the fares.
But a lot
and
of the people you're dealing with are on fixed incomes or lower incomes. They just don't have those means. I had a lot of conversations with paratransit riders. They're like, we can't afford this. And when other options also went away within the community, that made it even worse.
Yep.
So managing that is challenging at best. There is a potential option because if Measure 4 passes, that's going to impact some of transit and what the paratransit side looks like. So we're going to talk about that when we come back with Commissioner Mike Conry and Deidre. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Talk 1270. Welcome back to Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Super Talk 1270, you're tuned to Talk of the Town. I'm Steve Bachel and Deidre from Bismarck Transit and Mike Conley, Bismarck City Commissioner. And we're talking about the funding, the mechanism by which transit and paratransit are tied and why public transportation is so important in a community that's growing. And I want to shift gears now to Commissioner Conley because you've come up with this plan with the growing costs of transit. You've come up with this plan to kind of manage some of that. Now, I'm going to throw in the caveat that if Measure 4 passes from a property tax perspective, that could change the dynamic of what's going on with transit and paratransit in our community. And you've got a plan.
Well, I would say it's not you've got a plan or not that I have a plan. This has been an ongoing thing, and there's been several people, a lot of moving parts that have gone. So if I can back up in history a little bit, in 2022, before I even knew about being appointed to the city commission, before I even was reelected, I started attending transit meetings with the public transportation element, because my field is working with grandmas and grandpas and people with disabilities, and there were concerns out there to where there were some deficiencies within our community, and it was hurting families. So as I learned about it, transit was actually going through, they had a consultant and trying to navigate some of their challenges, and there was a significant funding shortfall that was there were some pros and cons that were going in it, and it became very apparent that we were not going to bridge that gap through the normal channels that were just spoken about. So I started listening to more meetings and talking with more people. And then once I was appointed and it became my portfolio, individual members from the communities of both Mandan and Bismarck started coming to me, and they said, what are we going to do if we lose our ride? And that's where the conversation really began, is it became about protecting the ride, because we couldn't keep it in the conversation about saving transit. And I listened to a lot of the meetings on all government levels in the communities, and that's when being part of initiated measure processes in the past, I started talking to the user groups. Let's create a conversation. What would it look like if we developed an initiated measure that would cover the spread as far as shortfalls that transit was having, but also let's talk about public transportation and protecting the ride in a fiscally responsible way. And that's where the origins of Measure 1 came about. To go on with that, there's a learning curve with that. There was a learning curve when I first became involved in them. You were part of one of those efforts back 5 years ago. And just to get one to come to fruition, you need to establish a subcommittee. And those were members of the user group and community members that may use it in the future. With the transportation system being part of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, so it's multi-jurisdictional, we were looking at two measures, not only the one in Bismarck that's on the November ballot, but we also had one in Mandan that passed by 60%. So they can cover their own public transportation needs and actually pay for their services, which Bismarck has been subsidizing since 1987. So they can take care of their own. Now we're focusing on Bismarck. And what's the details with it is that we needed 15% of the last mayor's vote election in equivalent of verified electoral signatures. That was 1,466. And there was a miscommunication. We actually had 1,570, but turned in significantly more of that to just earn the right to have the black ink printed on the white paper in November. And what it would be is public transportation, they don't need a full half cent, but that's on these measures, you have to look at half cent incrementals. 0.2 of a cent is enough to cover the spread and create the conversation of all these needs we've been talking about. And it doesn't pass on its own. It's a small part alone. It's a small part of the population that uses the services, that may need the services in the future. So we'll meet that need. We are a very pro-public safety community in our area, in the MPO. So 0.3 of a cent that normally goes to property taxes, we can change that from a property tax designation to a sales tax designation. In Bismarck, it's been an 8-year conversation. We've outgrown the size of our police station that was established in 1979. Our community is a lot bigger since then. So 0.3 of a cent can go to the building of stations, police or fire. Silver Ranch, the expansion out that way, there's a fire station going to go up there. We moved reserve funds around to make room for that. It'd be nice to leave that money right where it's at and maintain the tax levels flatter for longer if necessary. The acquisition of police or fire vehicles will always be a need. Those are costs incurred by the citizens for their safety. And then the administrative costs at the combined jail. We have a lot of people coming from outside our community, breaking our laws, making our community more challenging. They don't buy property, but the property tax owners are covering their expenses. In this way, anything that they purchase, it helps contribute to us addressing the challenges that they bring.
So, measure one, the various components are basically public safety.
Mm-hmm.
So 3/10 to the public safety side, 2/10 to the public transportation side, and that makes up the half-cent tax. So we've got about a minute and a half elevator pitch on why people should vote for this.
Well, it covers a lot of there's a lot of moving parts, and we took into consideration public transportation. It's significant. But it's a very hard conversation for most people because they can't relate to it. And then all of a sudden they need it. I know somebody that's very, very conservative that broke his back at one point. And all of a sudden he said, this is the way I was able to maintain my job. This is the way I stayed connected. But normally he was that person on the outside looking in that would not vote for something like this. And we're changing the conversation about protecting the ride itself, because now we can look at vouchers for taxi. We can look at maybe ideas that we haven't heard about yet. I know there's a significant amount of people that need rides to the airport at 5:30 in the morning, and Uber and Lyft have not been available, and it's created some heartburn. These are conversations that we can now have if this passes.
Okay, Mike Conley, Deidre, thanks for coming in. Measure one on the ballot for the city side of things on whether or not Bismarck passes that. Then, Deidre, does that alleviate long-term, short-term? What are you seeing as an administrator with Bisman Transit?
Yeah, so obviously it's a public transit measure, so that doesn't mean the money's just going to be handed to us. There would be a competitive component and also some oversight from the city on how those funds are being used. But it would 100% make our system a lot more sustainable without these horrible conversations of where we need to cut things.
Ongoing
horrible conversations. The headache of my job. Exactly.
Well, guys, thanks for coming in today. This is Talk of the Town on Super Talk 1270.
Talk of the Town, weekday mornings starting at 9 on Super Talk 1270 and the free Super Talk 1270 mobile app.